Hey, everybody, this is Jake Wynn, public historian, back for another recap of Masters of the Air, one of the final recaps that we are going to do, along with my co host, Justin Boydhofer, also a public historian. We've been doing these now for a long time. We are on episode 9 of Masters of the Air, which has been airing on Apple TV Plus. And this is the conclusion of the miniseries part. But this is not the last of our recaps. We'll touch on that in the conclusion of this episode. But in this, we're going to talk about the conclusion. We're going to talk about some of our thoughts about this episode, and a little bit about some of the legacy that we see coming from this World War II miniseries. So to kick us off, I'm going to throw it over to Justin to give us a recap of the final episode of Masters of the Air.
Yeah, and heck of a recap it was. As I was writing this or recapping the episode in my mind and organizing my notes, I realized so much happens. It's a lot. So we'll just scene by scene, we'll kind of go it that way. We have the first kind of part of the episode detailing Rosie getting shot down over Berlin, him understanding that he needs to make it to the Russian lines, and then him also being, I guess, captured by the Soviets, if you will, yelling out my favorite thing, Roosevelt, Coca-Cola, Pepsi-Cola, Lucky Strike, whatever he could to convince them not to shoot him. But yeah, so that's the first part of the episode that we see. That immediately we kind of pivot to the result of the Soviets kind of moving so far into Germany that Stalag Luft 3 is being evacuated in the middle of the night. They start burning everything. They try to get the airmen as best they can out on the road and marching in darkness, which we see as kind of perilous later on in the episode. We kind of focus on those marches to other POW camps throughout Germany, and we see Buck and Bucky try to figure out, should we escape? What's the end game going to look like? What does this kind of look like in the end? I thought one of the most poignant scenes, we'll talk more about it, is on the road. You see German troops going towards the front, and as you see them going towards the front, the realization of a German officer that this is the end, because the guys that are passing them going to the front are old men and young boys. Very striking scene. I think one of the more memorable scenes of the episode for me. With that, Rosie is trying to get back to England, and Russians kind of are taking him towards an airport, to which he then stops and sees the results of the last solution of the Third Reich. I couldn't tell what kind of camp it was, but it is a camp where the pretty ghastly scenes of the Holocaust are shown, and Rosie being a Jew, I think it kind of hits home from them at that point, and we'll talk more about, I think, what it could have. Oh, just leave it at the recap for now. Rosie comes to grips with what this war is and what kind of is going on there. It's the point that I think the curtain's kind of peeled back, and he can see it in full light. But with that, we then flip back to Buck and Bucky. They are in a town. They realize it's their time to escape. There's a lot of confusion going on. Buck makes it. Bucky, not so lucky, gets kind of caught at the last second. So he kind of covers as three other men kind of escape. We see the result of that escape, which then making it to the woods, getting attacked by, I think, a Hitler Youth unit, but it could have just been a normal German unit, and then kind of dealing with them, and the realization too that they don't even have any ammo left. That's kind of what they're facing now. With that, we then flip back to Crosby and Rosie at Thorpe Abbott's. Rosie makes it all the way back. He tells about his perilous journey, which takes him through the reaches of the world. Gets back to Thorpe Abbott's, and him and Crosby have a conversation about, are we the same people who we came here? Crosby will say that he looks at himself in the mirror and he doesn't like what he sees. One of the striking quotes from a philosopher, he says, whoever fights monsters should take care not to become a monster himself, which I think was a really poignant moment that Crosby's kind of realizing or hoping, what have I become as a person? How do I go back home and talk about this? Then we start to see them making it back to Thorpe Abbott's. Buck is the first one to make it back. Buck Clevin, he basically is there as the POW camp is being liberated. So Bucky eventually makes it back. It kind of jumps around a lot there. So it's easy to kind of sum it up by saying everybody makes it back to Thorpe Abbott's. And when they make it back to Thorpe Abbott's, before Bucky Egan makes it back, they do a food run into Belgium. So they're dropping supplies. They're dropping whatever they can to Dutch citizens who are starving there. And you can see it completely changes the Eighth Air Force, or it's already changed by this point, but it's one of the more memorable things that they've talked about. Harry Crosby talks about it in his memoirs. One of the most memorable things that he kind of was able to do is providing relief and providing humanitarian supplies for those folks who desperately needed it. Bucky Egan makes it back to base, and then you have this dramatic long shot of German citizens coming out to say goodbye, and them staring off into the sunset as B-17s keep flying up and going into the clouds, I should say, and leaving England, which corresponds with the scenes with VE Day as well, and then finally realizing that it's home. And then the last part of the episode, which I call if you ever see the movie Gettysburg, the Gettysburg Faces segment of the episode, where they take the historical face and the actor's face and they superimpose them on top of each other, or reveal through that way, and talk about what the men went to after the war, which I thought was very poignant. I really did enjoy that segment, and I think that there are things they could have added, which I'm sure you want to talk about, Jake, to that least segment at the end. So with that, kind of jumped around a lot there during the recap, but I guess it sums up the episode, right? It jumped around a ton. But what was your reaction to it? How'd you like it?
Yeah, so I think this is going to be in talking about this with you beforehand, a little bit of like yeah, two sides of this coin, which I think is fair to say of the responses that I've seen to Masters of the Air. Is like there's a lot of love for this series, which I do understand some of that love, and then there's also a lot of like vehement hatred for this series, which I tend to be more on the dislike side than on the love side. But and I think for all of you listening out there, you're going to get a little bit of both on this in our reactions to this episode, the good and the bad. What a journey we've been on. Whirlwind time this last episode, as we've been kind of teeing up a little bit in our previous recaps, covers a lot in a very short span of time. The episode goes about an hour and 20 minutes. It is a lot of things that we see and a lot of bouncing around, a lot of jumping around. I did not particularly like this episode very much. We did jump around a lot, which has been my biggest criticism of the series. It doesn't feel very cohesive, and the ending felt a little weak to me, to be honest. Just didn't feel the emotional connection to these characters. Felt like it was a little too neat and tidy, a little too everybody comes home and the war is over and everything is absolutely great, and there's not a lot of not a lot of depth for this to this, for me at least. I do have a question, which is a very minute detail in the middle of the episode that I still don't understand, which is, how does Jefferson, the Tuskegee Airman who loves to make maps, how on earth does he know about a forest outside of a random village on the other side of Germany from where they started on their winter march? How does he know about that to put it on a map? Justin,
I would
answer
say,
that.
just maybe a photographic memory. He loves maps, big map guy. I mean, I'm a big map guy. Maybe, that, or he pays attention to things, or he just has MapQuest. I don't know. Maybe he's the inventor of MapQuest, but yeah.
I just like that there was that one thing. It just like it literally, like I was watching it, I'm like, okay, this is, we're moving through this prisoner kind of story of the march, and it literally like ripped me out. Like I was like, wait, how does he know that? How does he know to make a map? How does he have time to make a map? And how does he know where the forest is? It just like threw me out of it, because I think it's like they make this reference earlier to him being a map maker, and that is his value as a prisoner, that equality, everybody is equal in the prison camp. He's bringing his map making skills, and it seems like this is just like a quick way of like, oh yeah, he's making maps, and it's like, but wait, him making maps in this context doesn't make any sense. Anyway, I'm probably going to get ripped apart for being like, wow, you really are in this case literally ripping apart the trees and missing the forest. So anyway, I will say positives of this, and I think the positives of the series is Rosie's character, and also the acting that Nate Mann does to play Rosie Rosenthal is amazing. Like he carries this series. He makes it bearable to me. And I'll just make a side note on this. It's kind of two as we were watching. This is the only episode that I've watched with my wife. She watched about 30 minutes at the end of this episode. On the negative side, she watched the conclusion and was like, well, that was campy. And I have to agree. I feel kind of the same way. It's a little felt a little ham-fisted to me. But she also said about the Rosie Rosenthal character, again, only watching 30 minutes of this entire series, she was like, that guy, he's really good. He's carrying this, isn't he? And I was like, yes, yes, he is. I think that portrayal, and listening to the interview with him, talking about portraying Robert Rosenthal, he brings a lot of just incredible energy to that role and really brought it to life. And I think that's, I would say, the shining portrayal in this series, has been the Rosie character, one that I will look back on and go back and watch the series again, and specifically look for that, and see how that role changes and how he portrays Rosie. And then one final thought, which is just like, this is another question for you, Justin. Was the riderless horse with the blood on him a callback to the Band of Brothers scene from the Battle of the Bulge, where who shoots him shoots the German off the horse?
Yeah, some messenger. I forget who it is, but yeah.
Yeah. And I was like, it was just a really weird scene where I was like, what are we trying to say? Is that a callback to Band of Brothers? I don't know. Did you think anything of that, or was it just kind of like,
Well,
oh, it's a horse?
we sent each other notes beforehand. It wasn't until Jake sent me the note that said that, and I was like, I guess maybe it is. I think maybe that's reading into the tea leaves a little too much. I think
That's what I'm
the horse
doing.
is there to show kind of like the I don't know that it extends far past. I mean, you see the German forces kind of rushing by, and then this horse is trying to catch up. It's also trying to figure out what's going on too. I don't know. It's kind of felt kind of sad for the horse when I saw it, right? Because it's stuck in the middle of nowhere and seems wounded. I really wanted, us just to get a Western out of this and Bucky Egan or Buck Clevin just to jump on the horse and start riding it. I would have been like, yeah, okay, good, go America. White Knight riding it back. But no, yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think viewing this episode in the lens of this may be, I don't know, I don't want to speak for them, but this may be the final ode for the World War II. What do you want to call it? What do we call it? The universe for Tom Hanks and Steven Spielberg. This has been a 20-year
Oh,
long universe that they have done.
the canon. I don't know, like
The
with like
canon,
talking about
yes,
like Star
correct,
Wars.
right.
Yeah.
The world, according to yeah, Jake disagreed with me so much there he muted me. Way to go.
I don't even know.
Uh,
I didn't even know I had that ability. So
well, it's
apologies,
good to know.
everyone. The person
But
you
yeah,
want to
no,
hear is Justin, not me. So naturally, I had to mute him.
of course. But no, I mean, this is the final hoorah for Hanks and Spielberg. So I think, this episode, yes, it kind of jumps around a lot. Yes, the end of the episode may be a little campy, but I mean, I have every right to be campy at this point, right? This is their love letter to their fathers, right? Spielberg talks about what his father's generation went through. I don't know if Hanks is, I don't know if his family has the direct kind of connection, but this is them, I think, finally putting a bow on, all right, hey, dad's generation. This has been a 20-year long project for us. We're finally happy that it's over, and we want to, set it up for put a bow on it, I guess. I know it might be campy. You have a scene of a bunch of infantrymen coming and liberating the German POW camp, and then they run the flagpole up, and of course it's Major Regan is the one that climbs the flagpole. In real life, I don't think it was him, but that did occur. And I mean, speak what you want about it being a little bit campy, but I don't think there was anything in here that was too crazily, written in. Maybe the line about knowing where the forest is, but on the whole, I mean, all the experience that you see portrayed relatively happened the way it is portrayed, right? They're marching from Eastern Europe all the way down. They get liberated, and it's I don't know. I think even the inclusion of the transition to helping with humanitarian supplies, I thought was a really great touch and a really great way to end it, because the United States has a tremendous burden and takes on that burden to help rebuild Europe after the war. You have this, and then you also are going to have, once relations with the Soviets kind of fall away and we have the Cold War start, you have what's also the Berlin airlift, which a lot of World War II era pilots and stuff will do as well. So I enjoyed the inclusion of that. I thought that it kind of showed them, hey, look, this is a reaffirmation of what you're fighting for. And I mean, for whatever World War II veterans are still alive, part of me thinks that, this is also a letter to them, thanking them after all of these years once again for, hey, we want to remember you here at the end with you dropping humanitarian supplies and everything to these civilians. We want to kind of put a nice bow on, yes, this is what you did here. So I think the greatest thing about this series is that it opens up the narrative. I mean, if you talk about Brandon Brothers of the Pacific, unless you're an infantryman, frontline infantry trigger puller, there's not going to be a lot of stuff in there that you relate with. The general experience of an infantryman is different than a lot of majority of folks who fight in the Second World War. You have a lot of support personnel. You have a lot of intel personnel. You have people who are the support personnel helping push the front lines forward. And until this series, you really don't see them portrayed on screen other than like a passing glance. So I think another reason why I enjoyed the end of this year too is you see the full on end for everybody included. You see the aircraft mechanic, I can't think of him right now, who goes up in the airplane for the first time. He's flying these missions too. I mean, I think that is great because that isn't something that we usually see with World War II stuff. Usually it's the combat and the front lines, and they have, whether it's Saving Private Ryan and Band of Brothers, you're always in the foxhole, but you never take a step back to look at what goes on behind the scenes to get those people there to help them out. So I really enjoyed this series, I think, for that. And then finally, I think to make Major Egan proud, to make Buck Egan proud, I would say that, using a baseball analogy, they tried to hit a home run, they swung, and they hit a ground rule double. So the ball still went over the fence. It still was accomplished. It's still a good thing. Maybe not, the level of what we thought it was going to be, but at the end of the day, ball still over the fence. They did their job, and I think they did a really good job showing the side of the war that had never been brought, or had been brought, but not in this way. And with that, I guess we'll kind of go into what we saw in the episode. I know I said a lot there without saying much. I think to sum everything I just set up, they did a good job. I appreciate. I think this is a good episode. I think this is a good kind of bookend to the end of it. But with that and the history behind it, we see a lot here at the end of the war, Jake. And I think you're going to talk on it a lot. One thing to kind of start us off with the history of it is I just get a sense of amazement at how long the German Reich, or the German kind of state, was able to hold up on both sides, even as everything's collapsing. I mean, you see it, these marches are coming through. You still have soldiers that are marching with them. You still have soldiers going to the front. I think it's I don't want to call it incredible, but it's just the fact the end took as long as it did, and it really took a while for the German army to cave in. I think you kind of see in this episode. But what did you think of the marches and everything that these guys are going through? I think that's the one thing that you'll see that you won't really see in a whole lot of other World War II outlets.
Yeah, I think that's probably my biggest takeaway from this episode that I'm really glad that they portrayed and did a pretty good job of showing it, is the Blizzard marches. And I think this is, the prisoners marching across Germany, and their experience. They're weak, they're not well fed, suffering from all kinds of illnesses from their time in the camps, and then are being expected to march 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 miles at a time is really remarkable. And I can't think of too many other places where this has been shown in popular media. And it's not just these guys. You'll hear this in a lot of narratives about Holocaust victims, survivors who underwent similar marches under much worse conditions from camps from far Eastern Europe, marching west at the same time period. It's kind of like, Justin, as you were talking about with, amazing that the German military lasted as long as it did. It's like part of that is they kept this system of oppression going as long as they did. And they did it by marching millions of people across Europe in the winter of 1944 to 45. That doesn't get as much, awareness. I don't think people are as aware of just the fact that, like, who knows what the percentage of Europe is literally on the move at this point, between refugees moving, between prisoners moving, between the armies moving. It's just it's a time that it's trying to wrap your head around it is really difficult. And I'm glad that they portrayed that in this series, to kind of see the realities of that for the American prisoners of war. I also thought it was interesting to include I'm glad they did, showing Rosie going into flying over and crash landing basically in no man's land on the Eastern Front, just to show the fact that the end of the war that landing behind Soviet lines was a very real possibility for American airmen with planes that are struggling or going down. Um, and I do wish one of the things I know I complained about this series trying to show everything in the experience of the eighth, but one of my favorite accounts from Harry Crosby's memoir is the shuttle missions where they would fly deliberately to Soviet territory and land at Soviet air bases, going deeper and deeper into the Third Reich, and bombing deeper and deeper, and then landing in Russian territory. There's some fascinating stories there that when I read Crosby's memoir, it's like the first time that I had ever been hit with this, like, oh, these shuttle missions, they're flying, the connection with the Soviets here is like very real. And some of the stories from that time are ludicrous. Like Harry Crosby's narratives around that are bonkers. Definitely worth a read just to read about his experiences at Soviet air bases, and the fact that a bunch of B-17s are blown up in a German air raid of one of those Soviet air bases is pretty crazy too. And I'll just say, you've already touched on the kind of the Dutch airdrop missions to bring food. I will say one of the things that I was very interested that they did not include was really any conversation about the fact that by the end of the war there were no targets left to bomb. It's never this show never really addresses in any depth what the level of destruction that they wrought in Germany. We see it on occasion. We see it when Bucky is captured, and is beaten up by German civilians and military personnel. On an earlier episode, we see it in Nuremberg, as the prisoners are marching through it on their way in the season in the show finale. But there's never really a conversation in any depth of just how there were no targets left by the end of the war. Everything was destroyed. I did think it was interesting that there's no commentary made on that. And again, I think that's a little bit of like, well, we're seeing it on screen. Why do we need to comment on it? That may be the case. But I did think that was an interesting choice from a writing standpoint to not directly address that destruction, instead of talking about, like you said, Justin, about the monsters quote, and talking about that in a very kind of 25,000-foot level,
Yeah.
to make an air war, a terrible air war joke. But yeah, so that's those were my thoughts about the history. Droning on for too long. Justin, what about you? Any other
No,
thoughts?
I mean, yeah, I already kind of covered everything I wanted to talk about there. You covered most of the stuff that I think was important. Like I said, with the old men and young boys kind of scene, that was very striking to me. I mean, very, very striking. And it was the first time I kind of watched it without it needed to be said. It wasn't, I mean, yes, he says like old men and young boys, it's kaput. I think the German officer is what he says there as he's seeing this. But even before he says that, right? Like you see it on the faces of those guys going forward. You see that young German, I don't know if he's in the is um, so it was a necessary kind of scene, I think, to kind of remind everybody that this is what happens when you fight this war. This is how they last for so long, is they are going to have to descend pretty horrible, um, pretty horrible kind of they can. So yeah, that I think was one of the more poignant scenes for me. And then he doesn't know that yet, but he wants to still, the job's not done. He wants to make sure it's seen, kind of in that sense. And that's what I wish, I guess, going into what we wish we would have seen. I know don't want to jump around. We're already talking about so much, but I mean, we love Rosie Rosenthal already. Post-war, I mean, he comes back home to New York. He's working in his prior law firm. He sees an ad in the newspaper basically saying, hey, we're still looking for people to go prosecute these folks over in Nuremberg. And he volunteers himself to go over there as a prosecuting attorney. You have photos of him in in kind of the chambers, I guess, or whatever you want to call it, where they're laying out these war crimes that these officers and these higher up folks in the German Reich committed. I think he interviews Herman Goring as one of the prosecuting attorneys as well. So it's just, I would have loved, and once again, it's a finite series. I know we only have a certain amount of time, but I mean, I thought that was really striking because you don't know that if you just watch the series, you get nothing of that. That he is going to take it upon himself to go and prosecute these folks after the war as an attorney. Um, that scene would have been so much, I think, so much more poignant if that connection was kind of drawn on screen. I hope that people understand that when he's looking at that camp and he's realizing what happened, he's internalizing it and saying, I still want to do my part to make sure these people are held accountable. So that's one of those things that I think if you take this episode on its own and you don't do any context around it, you're going to miss out. His story doesn't end here. He still has a pretty big role to play in the end. But yeah, so I mean, with that, the I guess legacy of this series is and I said the whole thing about hitting a ground rule double when they go to hit a home run or whatever you want to call it. I know that they probably knew that they were never going to reach the Band of Brothers kind of level. That's hard to do. You can't do that two times. I mean, it'd be very hard to do it once and let alone twice. I liked, if you finish the episode, and Jake kind of alluded to it, so I guess we can drop the spoiler now, Jake, is that if you finish the episode, the next thing that's going to pop up on your screen is going to be a documentary. The Bloody Hundredth was a documentary done about this unit by Apple TV Plus. It'll go straight into it. I think at least it did for me. I didn't have to press any sort of button. It went straight into it. It's an hour-long documentary. And I know we're going to have our thoughts on that, but I highly, highly recommend using that as kind of a companion to this end of this episode as well, because I think that the documentary does a really good job of kind of answering some of the questions, which I'll save for a future episode of that I had and kind of some of the things I wanted to see. But I think if you tie that kind of documentary in with this series, it'll I think the series a lot more justice than we were kind of. I didn't know that was coming, at least for me. I don't know about you, Jake. It was kind of a surprise to me at the end of it when I saw it. So all of these times we've been asking, like, man, I wish I would have heard from them. Man, I wish I would have seen them in real life. Well, now you do. And I hope that they kind of advertise that and push it out. But I know we're going to talk about it more, so I'll kind of hold my tongue for the rest of it. So, but with that, I mean, Jake, how about you? As a legacy kind of rewatchable, right? I mean, I think you talked about last episode making your way through Band of Brothers again. Is this going to be added to the schedule? How is that going to work? What are you kind of looking at? How do you think you're going to view it in about 10 years?
Yeah, I can't help. I know for those of you who have stuck it out with us to the end here, I think it won't be too much of a surprise to say that overall, a little disappointed in the series. It also had a lot to live up to. It's been talked about for years, over a decade that they've been working on this and finally got it to fruition. So it's a lot of weight on the shoulders of everybody involved with this project to make something that is going to satisfy everyone, and it's inevitably not going to satisfy everyone. So I don't know. My opinions on it may change. Maybe a rewatch or two will make me feel a little bit differently about it. Maybe I get some more of the references in here. Maybe I'll finally understand how Jefferson knows to draw the forest outside of town on his map. But right now I feel disappointed in it. But I'm very curious to see how that will change over time. Some episodes shone through. We talked about that. Some episodes in the middle I felt did a very, very good job of portraying things like the Munster raid. I think some of those episodes in the middle were really good. I thought the Tuskegee Airmen episode that introduced them was really good as well. I think it did a good job of trying to bring them into the story very quickly and successfully did that and tying it into the story of the Bloody 100th as well. But I also felt the sense of sadness, I will say, in concluding all of this, in part because this is kind of the end of an era. It's the end of the trilogy, so to speak. The Spielberg, Hanks, Getzman kind of World War II miniseries grouping has now come to an end, and it's it feels a little bittersweet that it's that we've gone on this journey and it's now at its end. It feels like an era of television kind of ended. It's so fascinating to see how different the environment is based on Band of Brothers back in 2001 to the media marketplace now in 2024. is remarkably different. And this is kind of the bridge between these different eras of television, and just to see how kind of prestige television developed since Band of Brothers. So I don't know, just interesting things kind of rattling around in my head
Well,
about this.
I think that it's a good point too. I mean, I don't know if this is going to be something that people revisit, right? I mean, these guys are the ones that have done it. They've done it the most times. I don't know if there's going to be another kind of Spielberg Hanks type of person. I mean, Christopher Nolan seems to go to World War II era all the time, right? I don't know if he's the next Spielberg. He keeps winning Oscars like Spielberg, but I mean, like the nostalgia of, I mean, think about it, right? 2001 is when Band of Brothers comes out. That's 23 years ago. I just was doing a mental exercise in my head. 23 years from 1941 is what, 1964. So if Band of Brothers came out during Pearl Harbor, this came out during the Vietnam War. And I guess it just took me a while to kind of put that together of how much time has gone by in these 2 decades of us telling the greatest generation our thanks and giving them our thanks. And with them going away and not being around anymore, um, I just don't know how that's going to impact our memory. I think it's going to simplify it, which I'm afraid of. People are just going to look to that have taken all the different stories about World War II in 10, 15, 20 years with no one else around to kind of have those experiences or tell us any other experiences. I think we're just going to get into the trap of just summing it up by, June 6, 1944. And then that's going to be our World War II day. And then we're not going to talk about any of the things that went around it. So I think that's the one big thing legacy wise of this series is that it every other World War II thing was going to take you to the beaches of Normandy or paratrooping in or whatever. This gives that support role I talked about of everything that had to go into it, the experiences of Tuskegee Airmen, of the 8th Air Force, everybody that had to make World War II kind of successful. And if we want to stay on D-Day, that's how America is going to work. This is vitally important to talk about. Is these are the months leading up to D-Day. These are why it's that successful. So I guess I don't want to fall into that trap. I want to make sure that we tell the full war and all the different complexities of it. But if we're going to end up telling just the D-Day story, this connects to it just like everybody else. And for a lot of Americans, I think that's what they're going to, you quiz them about D-Day, that's going to be the only thing they tell you about World War II. So I don't know. I hope it stands up. I hope it after, 10, 20 years, we look back on it and 23 years from now, we look back on this and kind of say, okay, it stood the test of time like Band of Brothers. That's the other thing. 23 years ago, Band of Brothers still looks like it could be made yesterday. This, I think they did it pretty well with not relying super heavy on CGI, but still doing it in a good way because they needed to out of necessity. But augmenting that with real B-17s and real kind of action within the cockpit. So, wow, that was a lot. So I'll give it back to you, Jake.
Yeah. So if you like these conversations, I will say Justin and I aren't ready to announce this quite yet, but there's more coming in terms of like conversations about how we remember things and the people who help us remember things and the museums and the places and the movies and the TV, how we as the public kind of analyze and talk about and think about history and how that evolves over time. So stay tuned for that. There is one more episode about Masters of the Air coming. We're going to talk about the documentary in more depth. That'll be our last episode about Masters of the Air. And as we are about to wrap up here, thank you all so much for watching. We really appreciate all the support. Hope you've been enjoying these series. We've been enjoying making this. And we're very excited for one last go